Hey everybody, it's Brian Shannon from alphatrends.net. Today's Friday, the 18th of October 2019. Markets were generally positive here this week. Oil fell a little bit, as did the semiconductors. It's interesting that we heard so much positive about the semiconductors this week, but they were down, so we'll take a look at that in a moment. Here's the S&P 500 looking at a 30-minute time frame. Each one of these candles represents 30 minutes worth of time, and you can see that we are still holding right at that 5-day moving average. We did slow down a little bit here this week in terms of the pace of the uptrend, but we're clearly still bullish, especially when you look at the daily time frame. We're holding underneath the prior lows, and next week is a particularly busy week for earnings, and that's going to make a huge difference in whether this market wants to pull back and test some support in this 295 level that we're just back above, or if it wants to break to new all-time highs. The longer-term trend is higher. The way I learned it is that consolidations tend to resolve in the direction of the primary trend, which of course is higher. So just a little bit of caution, like I said, based on the fact that we're slowing down here and the 5-day moving average is flattened out a bit. But I don't see any reason to be bearish, and it's going to be more a case of how the stocks trade on an individual basis than I think the markets overall. Again, because of earnings. Now the Nasdaq is bumping up pretty much against this little band of resistance here that we've seen in place since the July highs, and we do have higher lows coming into this as well. The more important level we'll want to see hold next week is at about 189. If we can maintain above that, even if we pull back down to it, and that would provide a good level to bounce higher from, and in that case I would want to get long somewhere over in here. Or if it was to break down, and let's just draw that with a straight line again. If it were to break down and hold below these moving averages, then that would be the bearish scenario. But again, the primary trend is higher for the Nasdaq, so the odds do favor further upside. Russell 2000, we know this has just been a mess all year long, and it's back to the middle point of this range. Realistically, if you're in this market, you're very frustrated unless you're trading it from an intermediate term perspective. Personally, I've just been leaving it alone, and I would suggest the same thing. The semiconductors, we know, broke that downtrend line a week and a half ago, and continued up to new all-time highs. So we saw new all-time highs this week, but we closed off those highs, and perhaps we're going to consolidate a little bit further. We did find buyers this morning at that volume-weighted average price from the midpoint of this month. But again, we're still in a primary uptrend, and the semiconductors have been pretty gappy in terms of how they've been moving. But if we can see them, let's clear this off, and what I wanted to do was draw like this. If we can see maybe a day or two something like this, and then sideways, and then perhaps higher, that would be a bullish scenario that would get me interested in the market. Biotechs have recovered. They've trapped shorts in here. I don't see a reason to be long, but I certainly wouldn't want to be short either. The primary trend, we've still got a pattern of lower highs and lower lows, but I think that the shorts got trapped in here, so I'd say it's probably just best to leave them alone. Financials had a good week. They gapped up on some earnings and came right up to this prior band of resistance. The good news is that they're holding on to the bulk of those gains in this area. So when we look at the 30-minute time frame, this is a scenario I'd sketched out earlier in the week as a potential scenario when I did a video for subscribers, and so far we're holding up. What we want to see next week, I think, is for probably about this area, 2775-ish, to hold. If it can do that, maybe it has enough energy to break through this band of resistance, and in that case, that's about $28.30. We're pretty close to highs here, so and that just puts us back into looking at the weekly time frame in this bigger area. Maybe we can continue to build energy in there. We'll see. But one of the stocks I'd mentioned this week was MasterCard. I'd mentioned this on Twitter, and then had gotten long in there, but Unfortunately, didn't get to take any off in terms of a first upside target, but I did get stopped out over here, which was a nice small loss. And we want to take those losses because we don't know this will happen. But when it does drop the next day another 6 points, it's nice to be out of the stock. So what we saw in here, I was pointing out the scenario that the volume weighted average price off the peak was holding along with a rising 50-day moving average. But this is why we have plans and we have backup plans. The plan is to buy on strength. The backup plan is if it fails to make a higher high and higher low, we move to the sidelines and cash and get out. You might have seen this beyond it. For the last 2 weeks, I've been talking about it bearishly. As I mentioned in a video last night, I thought on Wednesday that it was likely that the stock would rally up a little bit before it declined again, but I wasn't willing to cover my short because I wanted to leave my stop on. So this is the level that I've been dropping the stops down below. And again, I've been talking about this for this is the third Friday in a row I've talked about it as a bearish stock. Be aware that it's getting more likely that it will experience a bounce here soon, especially as it comes in to cover, to close that gap, and it might not close that gap. So if you do have short positions somehow, then be willing to be ready to cover some and look for another bounce. If you're looking to short it, maybe it bounces up something like this. We'll keep an eye on it, but it's getting stretched to the downside, and you just want to be aware, where has it come from? It's just dropped really from 160 down to 110. So pretty big drop there, almost 30%. Know when to take your profits, especially on the short side when we can see bounces so quickly materialize. I guess that's going to be it for me this week. I hope you had a good week of trading, and I'll talk to you again next week. Thanks.